Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go over my review of SummerSlam 1995. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is 1-2-3 Kid versus Hakushi. Number one, I thought this was a really good opening matchup for SummerSlam 1995. Back and forth matchup between both 1-2-3 Kid and Hakushi, with Hakushi keeping the pace of the match. And Hakushi ultimately hits the finish on 1-2-3 Kid, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Hakushi. Hats off to Hakushi for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Bob Holly. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Helmsley and Holly, with Hunter keeping the pace of the match. Helmsley also hits the pedigree on Bob Holly, pinning him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Hunter Hearst Helmsley. A couple of things I want to say about this matchup really quick, man. Number one, this wasn't a bad match. It was a decent matchup. I hated the Hunter Hearst Helmsley gimmick. I hated it, man. It just wasn't. I don't know what WWE and Vince McMahon was thinking at that time, man, but the gimmick was awful. I mean, with all due respect, Bob Holly's gimmick at that time wasn't that good either. I think they were calling him Spark Plug Bob Holly. It was more like a NASCAR driver gimmick. Wasn't a big fan of that either. But I feel like this was kind of a rough patch for WWE at this time. But wasn't really a big fan of the Hunter Hearst Helmsley gimmick, but hats off to Hunter Hearst Helmsley for picking up the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Eli and Jacob Blue versus the Smoking Guns. I thought it was a decent matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Eli and Jacob Blue keeping the pace of the match. But the Smoking Guns ultimately hit the finish on Eli and Jacob Blue, pinning them for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Smoking Guns. Hats off to the Smoking Guns for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Skip versus Barry Horowitz. First thing I'll notice about this matchup when I did watch it is that Skip was also known as Chris Candido, former ECW talent. It was an okay matchup. It was a back and forth matchup between both Skip and Barry Horowitz, with Barry Horowitz keeping the pace of the match. Hakushi comes down to the ring, pretty much distracts Skip, and allows Barry Horowitz to hit a roll-up on Skip, pinning him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Barry Horowitz. Hats off to Barry Horowitz for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Alundra Blaze defending her WWE Women's Championship against Bertha Faye. Again, I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth match between both Alundra Blaze and Bertha Faye, with Alundra Blaze keeping the pace of the match. But Bertha Faye ultimately hits a devastating powerbomb on Alundra Blaze, pinning her for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WWE Women's Champion, is Bertha Faye. Hats off to Bertha Faye for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is The Undertaker versus Kama in a casket match. I thought this was a really good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Taker and Kama, with Taker keeping the pace of the match. Undertaker hits his signature old school on Kama in the middle of the ring. Kama then hits a devastating power slam on Taker as well. Undertaker then hits a tombstone on Kama and ends up throwing Kama into the casket, which allows Undertaker to get the win. Hats off to Undertaker for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Isaac Yankem versus Bret Hart. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Isaac Yankem and Bret Hart, with Hart keeping the pace of the match. Jerry Lawler gets involved, ends up attacking Bret Hart to a point where it looks like Hart got tied up in the ropes and his neck was stuck in between the ropes. It looked absolutely brutal. But Bret Hart ultimately gets the win by disqualification. A couple of things I'm going to say about this matchup. Number one, Isaac Yankem, if you guys don't know, later on in his career was known as Kane. Again, the gimmick from Isaac Yankem was just brutal. I don't know what they were thinking with that gimmick. But this was also a time where Bret Hart was kind of having a rivalry, with, if you will, with Jerry the King Lawler. Which, I mean, for what it's worth, it was an okay storyline. I don't see why Jerry Lawler was beefing with Bret Hart, I guess because of the King of the Ring thing, but really wasn't needed. But again, I guess this was kind of something that gave Jerry Lawler something to do in professional wrestling as far as something in ring, because at that point he was just doing basically commentary. for WWE at the time. So he basically really wasn't doing much as far as in-ring ability or having wrestling matches. So I guess he wanted to have matches with Bret Hart because Bret had won the King of the Ring. But hats off to Bret Hart for getting the win in this match, even though it was by disqualification. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. In my honest opinion, should have been the main event of SummerSlam 1995. It is Shawn Michaels defending his WWE Intercontinental Championship against Razor Ramon in a ladder match. Number one, I thought this was a fantastic matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. Razor ends up hitting a devastating suplex on Shawn, sending him to the outside with his leg hitting the guardrail. Razor then hits a fallaway slam off the top rope on Shawn Michaels. Michaels then hits a crazy moonsault off the ladder on Razor Ramon in the middle of the ring. Razor then goes for a Razor's Edge, but gets thrown out of the ring by Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels then grabs the ladder, climbs up, grabs the Intercontinental Championship, and your winner of the match is Shawn Michaels. A couple of things I'm going to say about this too, and I stated this in the past, man. Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon, for what it's worth, the Intercontinental Championship back in the day was always predominantly known, especially way more known back then than what it is now. And a lot of people held that championship. Roddy Piper, Mr. Perfect, Ultimate Warrior, Bret Hart, Macho Man Randy Savage, just to name a few. But I will say this. The matches that Shawn Michaels had with Razor Ramon for the Intercontinental Championship, for the match they had here at SummerSlam 1995 and WrestleMania 10, those ladder matches, man, are always going to be synonymous for both Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon's careers, hands down. The other thing is that they really brought a new spotlight onto the Intercontinental Championship, which to make it predominantly known. And it was. Back in the day, the Intercontinental Championship was just as much as important as the WWE Championship. It was very important. And I feel like Shawn and Razor really brought a new light into the Intercontinental Championship picture, man. And they've done a fantastic job by doing so. So, hats off to Shawn Michaels for getting the win in this match and at that time retaining the Intercontinental Championship. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of SummerSlam 1995. It is Diesel defending the WWE Championship against King Mabel. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between both Diesel and Mabel, with Diesel keeping the pace of the match. Mabel takes out the referee. Lex Luger is here, but Diesel ends up attacking Lex Luger. Diesel then hits a clothesline off the top rope on Mabel, pinning him for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time, still WWE Champion, is Diesel. Hats off to Diesel for getting the win in this matchup. Couple of things I'm going to say about SummerSlam 1995. Number one, the main event of this pay-per-view should have been Shawn versus Razor for the Intercontinental Championship. Even though I know Diesel had the WWE Championship at that time, the money match to me was Shawn versus Razor for the Intercontinental Championship. It was a phenomenal matchup. Both those guys gelled in the ring perfectly together, man. And it just told a hell of a story. An absolute hell of a story. And to be honest, not trying to disrespect Mabel or anything else like that, or Diesel, but the main event to me of SummerSlam 1995 was definitely Shawn versus Razor Ramon. Hands down. Probably the best match on the card that entire night. Undertaker versus Kama in the casket match. Fantastic. I did like the fact that they were kind of playing off with, Kama taking the urn and then melting it down to make a chain out of the urn, Undertaker's urn. Ted DiBiase obviously being involved with Kama being his manager. Paul Bearer being there and trying to attack Ted DiBiase was fantastic. It was absolutely hilarious. So, it was cool to go back and kind of watch this event, man, and kind of, look back, because SummerSlam, it wasn't the best SummerSlam I've ever seen, but it definitely was not the worst. But the main event, like I had stated, definitely should have been Shawn Michaels defending the Intercontinental Championship against Razor in that ladder match on the main event. 100%. But if I had to give SummerSlam 1995 a rating, I'd probably give it maybe a 6.5, 7 at best, man. And honestly, it's solely based upon that ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. It was absolutely fantastic matchup, man. But this is my review of SummerSlam 1995. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic.